Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyett, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. Today's guest is Shilee Pearson, who is an expert dog trainer with RuffLife K9. Shilee moved to Amarillo a couple of years ago to pursue a relationship, and in the process, she left behind a very successful dog training business in Omaha, Nebraska, and she started all over fresh in Amarillo. And my family ended up connecting with Shilee when we got our puppy Lincoln in early 2023, and we became a client. We've done a lot of dog training over the years and just never found anyone with the effectiveness and fun of Shilee's approach. I've personally recommended her to friends. They always come back with glowing reviews. So I wanted to talk to her in this episode. Shilee grew up training horses. She competed in rodeo as a barrel racer, but she found her passion in dog training using an approach that's based on play and relationships with the dog, which feels different from every other kind of training we've had. And so we talk about that. We talk about uprooting her life and business to move to Amarillo, and how the dog culture in Amarillo is different from any other place she's been. Here's Shilee Pearson. Shilee Pearson, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor to have you. I've known you for a couple of years now, but I want to start with you the same way I start with all my guests, and that's just to ask why you're here in Amarillo. And I know that that's its own story. So tell me what brought you here.
Okay, so originally my husband is from this area, and so we had done long distance dating for a while. And so I kind of just decided to make the jump to Amarillo. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. I was born and raised in a small town up there outside of Omaha, probably 20 minutes north of there. And I went to school outside of Omaha and found myself back there. And that's started my dog training business there. Okay. And then met my husband, did long distance, and ended up moving here. So, and that was about 2 years ago. Moved down here in December.
Okay. So you guys met sort of like post-pandemic social media kind of stuff?
Yes. Or? Yeah, we met, what would that have been? 2022. Yes. The beginning of 2022. And I moved down here at the end of 2022, December, and then started the business in 2023. Okay. So all relatively recently.
But you had a business before you came here.
I did.
So you weren't really starting over. You were just like leaving behind an existing clientele and trying to find a new one, right?
Yes. So I started my dog training business up in Omaha in 2018-ish, roughly. Okay. And so prior to that, though, I had trained horses when I was younger. I kind of always dabbled in animal training. And I went to college to get a biology degree, which really had nothing to do with what I wanted to do, but
you can include animals in it, though.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to have, a degree, and ended up getting out of college and decided to go down the dog training path. Okay. I got a dog. Do you want me to go into that? Because that's a long story.
No, I want to know that story, because we'll talk about Amarillo and all that stuff in a little bit. But tell me how you ended up in dog training and why the specific style or type of training you do is the thing that you pursued. Because there's a lot of different kinds of ways to train a dog. For sure.
And so I got into dog training. I got a dog in college, and he had severe behavioral problems. So he was a rescue. I got him when he was 8 weeks old, but the rescue got him when he was 4 weeks old. Okay. And he was neutered at 6 weeks old, which if you know anything about really neutering dogs, it's really early, and that's causes a lot of developmental problems, both mentally and physically. And so I had him, he was very human aggressive, is probably the best way to put it. He would come off the couch, try to eat my brother, try to eat my dad. And so I ended up going through 6 or 7 different trainers in Omaha, trying to find someone to help. And I couldn't find anyone. And I got turned down by a bunch of trainers. I got kicked out of a bunch of classes. My dog got kicked out of daycare. And so I ended up finding a trainer that was about an hour away from me in Iowa. And I went there with him. His name was Coda. And we started training, and he did really well. And the trainer at the time just looked at me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about going into dog training? You're really good at it." And I was like, well, I've always really liked training animals, but I'm getting my degree in biology, and I didn't really know there was really a business for dog training.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you have a dog that has behavioral issues, you really don't think about dog training. Like growing up, I trained our dogs to like sit down, do all the fun things, but I never had a dog that was trying to eat people. She was like, you should really go to it. And I was like, well, I mean, we'll think about it. And she ended up starting a mentor program that year that I got into. And that's kind of how I got into dog training. That was about a year long. And then I started my own business. So that was in 2018. As I went into it, like you said earlier, there's a million ways to train a dog. And the way that I was training, I didn't love. It was a lot of like training, almost like military style, I guess is the best way to put it. And the dogs didn't play a ton.
A lot of trainers like train police dogs.
Yes.
Or they train bomb sniffing dogs or things like that, like dogs that are working dogs and not just a family dog that's well behaved.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. And so it was a lot more strict training, I guess you could say. And I was like, there's got to be something different out there. And so I had a friend at the time that was also a dog trainer that found a trainer in Florida. And his name is Ivan Balabanoff. And he started a dog training school. He's a world-renowned trainer. He has a bunch of different competition, like awards and national titles and anything and everything you can think of. He does it with a lot of IGP dogs.
What does that mean?
So that is like protection sports and like best way to put it. So that's a lot of like sport work for dogs. He works with Malinois. He breeds them, all of those. And so we found that he had a school, and I had taken a couple of his classes he had online that were just very short, 2 or 3 hour, I don't know, how would you put it? Like online courses, that he just kind of explained certain things, and then that's all you would get from it. But the amount of information you could get in those 2 or 3 hours were worlds ahead of where I was even in a whole year of mentorship. And so I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And so I signed up for his school, and I ended up going through his school and got certified in that training style. And so that training is called Training Without Conflict, or TWC. And what that focuses on is more the relationship that you have with your dog. And also, I mean, you hear it all the time right now, like, oh, I use play to train a dog. And that's not the whole thing of it, but it's a really easy way to explain it, is that you focus a lot on the interaction with the dog and not so much just like, I want this specific sit, or I want this specific down. I want an actual relationship with my dog where he is wanting to work with me, I'm wanting to work with them, and you become a team, but you also focus on how the dog themselves feel. Because a lot of training will look at the dog and be like, okay, I want this specific behavior, and I don't care what my dog looks like doing it, or I don't care how they feel about doing it. I just want them to do it.
And it's like really heavy on discipline.
It is.
Or reward, like either of those things.
Exactly, yeah. And so when you approach it from a different angle and use play, I feel like it brings a totally different aspect for the dog. Not only that, but the dog becomes somebody, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Like, they're not put in this tiny little box that they have to stay in. They're allowed to express themselves and be who they really want to be. And I know that sounds weird for a dog, but dogs have emotions. I mean, anyone that has them in their house, you can tell that they have a personality. And that's one of the number one things my clients, when they come to me, say is, I don't want my dog to lose their personality. Right. And my response to them is always, if your dog comes home and has lost their personality, I have failed at my job, because that's not my job. My job is to help you shape the dog and work with the dog where they are at, so you can both live a very balanced life, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Not so much that you're, like you said, on discipline, or even that you have to constantly have food on you to get your dog to work with you. So I want your dog to just work with you because you guys are a team, not because you feel like you have to. Yeah, they're like cowering in the corner.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, I should say that we're clients of yours. That's how we know each other. And that was one of the things that was important to us as we got our dog Lincoln, who is a bigger dog than we've typically had. He's not huge, but he's bigger than our tiny little Yorkies that we've had. And we wanted him to be, a dog that we could take places and that would be good with a lot of family members, and that we could go on a walk and all that stuff. But he was also just a goofball, and we didn't want to lose that goofball aspect, because he became, a military dog that we could shout commands at, and he would do all these things. So like that was a drawing point for us.
And anyone who meets Lincoln will realize his goofballness is definitely still there.
Still very much a goofball, but if we tell him to stop, he'll
he does, yeah. And he does fantastic out in public and everything of that sort. So you got the dog that you wanted, right? He's a goofball and he's fun and he's all those things, but he's still well behaved. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what people want. People don't normally get a dog because they want a military style dog. Some people do. And by all means, that is a training that you can pursue. But the majority of people that get pet dogs just want a family-friendly dog that's good around everybody, right? And they can take out on a walk and they're not getting yanked down the street, or it's not chasing squirrels or trying to eat another dog or anything like that. And most of the time, if you ask people, like, do you want to play with your dog, like at the start of training, they're like, yeah, I do. You know, they just don't really know how to do it, which again sounds weird, but there is a method to the madness when it comes to playing. You're not just chasing your dog around the backyard. There's actually rules and boundaries and structure and all of that.
Lincoln had to be taught to fetch a ball. So one of the things that we really appreciated, and this felt a little bit new to me, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, because I may be, like our dog training previously had been either we go to a place like, you know, PetSmart and that sort of facility, or like a specialized dog trainer. You go to them and then you do some training with them. But like you do a lot of work at home. You know, you'll come to our house and do a homeschool sort of thing, whether we're involved or not. Or you would take Lincoln out on a walk in our neighborhood. Does that feel different now that you've been in Amarillo for a couple of years? Like, are other dog trainers doing that sort of thing? Or is it fairly new?
So there tends to be a divide. A lot of dog trainers will do private sessions, which is where they come to your house. You know, they have a session with you 1 to 2 hours. Then you have homework to upkeep over the week. And I do that too. Or the other side of it, they do board and trains where they take the dog from you. You know, the dog stays with you for 3 weeks or so, and then they send it back, and you might have a session or two, and then you're on your own.
Right.
I do both of those things, but I found I started that maybe 5 years ago, where it was like the homeschool aspect, like you were talking about. So I go to the people's houses, and whether you're there or not, kind of like a dog walker, working with the dog every single day in the environment they're normally exposed to really has a lot more benefit than you would think. So if the dog obviously has aggression, they're trying to eat people, getting them out of the environment and having what we'd call an optimal learning environment is necessary. Yeah. But for the dog that you just need to come back when called and sit and do all of the basic things, keeping them in the household, one, it alleviates the anxiety of the dog getting thrown into a totally different environment.
Right. Which can be stressful. I mean, going to PetSmart with a bunch of other dogs, like that's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. Or getting, yanked from your home for 3 weeks, that's a lot too. Shoved into a totally different pack, that can be a lot for a dog. But it also helps the anxiety of the people, which I think helps a ton too. And the people are also still heavily involved. And I always tell people 90% of training is going to fall on the owners after the fact, right? I can train your dog all day long, but it doesn't matter what I can do.
If we don't replicate it,
it's going to fall apart. Yeah. I think I told you guys, you're just going to burn your money. And I think that holds true in any aspect of dog training, but especially with the homeschool, it feels like the people want to be more involved, and they almost have to be more involved, and they see immediate changes in the dog, which I think helps kind of snowball everyone into wanting to participate, and that gets better results long term. So it definitely is a new concept. I don't really know many trainers that do it. I learned it from another trainer in a different part of the country, and I kind of just adapted it and took it here. So.
Another thing that was interesting to us, you mentioned the pack or your pack, because you have several dogs, and we wanted Lincoln to be good around other dogs too, not just with us. And that was something that we really liked, was that if he did a board and train, or if he stayed at your house for any amount of time, like he was spending time with other dogs who themselves were well behaved, and you're an authority, but like that was good for him socializing wise. It helped him learn how to respect other dogs, because he's not going to have large dogs in our house, So that was another aspect that felt a little bit new for us.
Yeah. And so it is nice to get them around other dogs, and kind of, like you said, have that socialization. In any of the programs, I try to bring my dogs into it, because your dog can be great around people, but it's going to run into other dogs when you're out and about. And so having the dog be able to work around other dogs of different sizes is really beneficial. The only size we lack right now are really small dogs. And I often asked you guys if I can borrow Lincoln in some sessions, just because dogs can react differently to one of my dogs' names is Riot, and he's huge. dogs and people react differently to him than they do to a smaller dog. And so taking the dog out of the environment and letting them interact and learn how to interact properly and be able to make those mistakes. Because a lot of times taking your dog to the dog park can be really detrimental, I guess, is a good way to put it, to dog behavior, because you have no idea what you're running into, disease-wise, behavioral-wise, anything of that sort. And so putting your dog into the dog park and hoping for the best can be very bad.
I mean, some dogs have anxiety related to other dogs, and you're just tossing them into this place and hoping that they know what to do. Yeah, exactly.
And so by having it more structured and having dogs there that are forgiving, if a dog makes a mistake and goes after one of my dogs aren't going to go right back at him.
Right.
You know, they have a threshold that they can handle. And so that's really beneficial. And I feel like that is a huge part of dog training. If you don't have a dog in there, your dog's just good around people, which is great, but I mean, there's other aspects of it too. So any dogs that are in private sessions or homeschool or board and train, they all are around my dogs at some capacity.
Tell me what it was like to build a business in Nebraska that relies on relationships. I mean, it's word of mouth. You train somebody and they say, who trained your dog? And somebody, sends them your way. And then you just like wrap it all up and move here and start over. What was that like?
Yeah, so Omaha was a lot easier to build a business for a couple of reasons. I grew up there, so I knew a lot of people. Yeah. And obviously knowing people trust you and you can form those relationships faster. But I also had my mentor from years prior that if she had too many dogs, she would send them to me, right? So even though I trained differently than her at that time, we still were on a common ground, right? We all still want the best for the dogs. And so if she got too many dogs, and she would just kind of pass them over to me, and vice versa. There were many of us that all worked in a group. If I got too many, I would send them to her, different trainers. So there was kind of a network of trainers up there that kind of all worked together. And I still actually, just the other day, I had someone text me and say, hey, you trained my dog a couple of years ago and I really need help. Like, where are you at? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm in Texas, but here's a couple of people in Omaha that would be really beneficial. And so it was a lot easier in Omaha.
Yeah. So you left all that behind.
I did. Yeah. And to pick up and move down here, I had a couple of clients in Omaha that were like, you know what? We still want to work with you. So we'll do virtual sessions. So that kind of bridged the gap, at least to move.
With a dog?
Yeah. So it was tough. I had met with them before I moved, and then we did a bunch of online stuff. And then I had actually, like for a timeline, I'd moved down here the beginning of December and I was going back up for Christmas. Okay. And so we had done some virtual sessions, and then around Christmas time, I did a bunch of sessions up there and worked. And then I went back up there, I think in February maybe. And so we kind of just spaced out our in-person sessions. I don't do a ton of virtual sessions now because of that, because it is really hard.
Lincoln doesn't understand somebody talking to him on a phone, so I can't imagine that.
I mean, it can work. And if the people are willing to work with you, it can work. But so that kind of bridged the gap. But then moving down here, I got really lucky. So obviously my husband being around here, he knew some people and he kind of just spread the word. And his chiropractor actually at the time was so helpful. I mean, she's still our chiropractor. She was so helpful in spreading the word. And I ended up getting my first client. And then we always joke that there's like 2 clients that spread the word constantly around here for us, and they built my business. And now, obviously, being here for almost 2 years running a business, people have found out about me and it kind of just snowballs. But originally, I went from having, maybe like 5 to 6 clients a week that I was constantly training with to none. Was terrifying. And I'm still not to where I was in Nebraska yet, but I mean, that took 6 years up there to get, and knowing a ton of people and having a mentor that actually worked in that community made it a lot easier. So it's growing. It is. But it was terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine. I want to talk about, one of the interesting conversations we've had with you has been about dog culture between Omaha and Amarillo. How people have dogs, how people treat dogs. You mentioned one time that nobody in Nebraska had the little fence windows where a dog could look at and go crazy because somebody walks by. Those kinds of things. Like, we still kind of feel like Amarillo is part of the Midwest. But like, is there a distinct difference in dogs?
Yeah.
And how people, manage dogs around here?
There is. And also, as you move around the country, you'll see that different dog breeds are way more popular in certain areas. And so I mean, pit bulls are always popular in about any area, and they're very popular down here too. They were popular in Omaha. But the amount of stray dogs down here is next level. And I feel like if you've never been anywhere else but Amarillo, that's something you would not really know. But when I moved down here, I mean, I would see a stray dog multiple times a week. And in Omaha, it would be if you saw a stray dog, you would pull off to the side of the road. You know, they would probably have a collar because most of the times they weren't strays. And you would call, or you'd call the Humane Society, and they would be there within an instant to check to make sure they had the chips in them or whatever it was. But we got our little pitty from the shelter. Her name's Nara. And when we went there, I was like, this is insane. I'm not from around here. How do you guys have so many dogs? And the guy told me they get anywhere between 500 to 2,000 dogs a month coming through their shelter. And I don't know the actual numbers from Omaha, but I would guess that's probably their 6 month to a year number.
Wow, okay.
Like the shelter down here is like 3 or 4 times the Humane Societies. And working up there, before I knew I was going to move to this area, I would get dogs all the time from Lubbock. I would say, oh, where'd you get this dog? And they'd say, oh, I got it from a rescue in Lubbock, or I got it from a rescue in Amarillo. A lot of the dogs around here are shipped up to the other states, you know, up north, trying to alleviate our problem here and help in other areas. And so it's totally different. I mean, and the way people treat their dogs down here is different. And like you said, the windows and the fences, I was walking one of my dogs and I was like, what are these things? Like, I've never seen them before. And it's just causing these dogs to have reactivity problems. I mean, most of the time the dogs aren't sitting at those little bubbles calm, right? Watching.
Right.
Most of the time they're losing their minds, not helping the dog on the street trying to walk past or anything of that sort. So those were totally new. I've never seen those before. But also just the way people have dogs down here. Most of the times the dogs are just out in the backyard, you know, or free roaming or whatever it might be, which is just totally different. Even coming from a small town, it wasn't that way. I mean, I don't think there were really any really stray dogs at all in our small town. And in Omaha, there wasn't a ton. And yeah, I don't know. It's just been totally different down here. And the way people, like I said, work with them down here is also different. I feel like dog training there's a lot of dog trainers in Amarillo, which I did not know when I moved here. And there's a lot of well-known dog trainers in Amarillo, but I feel like there's not a lot of people that seek dog training in Amarillo, and maybe I'm just wrong.
Okay.
But I do feel like once people have dogs, they either have like 5 dogs or they have no dogs. I don't feel like there's a ton of people in between. When we've done like vendor shows and stuff like that, and people talk to us, they're always like, oh yeah, I have 4 dogs, or, you know, and in Omaha, that wasn't a thing. I don't think you can have 4 dogs in Omaha.
Yeah.
I think you can only have 3 and under.
There may be rules within the city limits here.
I think there is, but I think
followed.
it's 4 here, so it's a little bit higher. But I just feel like you either have like 5 dogs or you have no dogs, and there's really no one in between.
Is there anything else different that you found moving here? I mean, maybe not even related to dogs. Like, is it a place where it felt sort of similar to Nebraska, or did it feel, oh, I've entered a different world?
The weather's similar.
Well, that's true. That's true.
It is similar.
It's probably even a little worse sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Yeah. But I mean, the people around here, like, people are very friendly in Omaha, and I have not found really anyone down here that's not friendly.
Okay.
I've always had a really good experience with people down here. So I feel like what you always hear, like the Midwest personality is very similar down here. So I would say, yeah, I mean, Amarillo is Midwesty in that sense. The accents are totally different down here. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have Southern accents, which is not obviously in Nebraska. There's some really big similarities, but there's some that are like with dogs. Dogs is just there's a huge divide.
Yeah,
that's
and
totally
that's not
different.
something that people would think about.
No, it's not. And I mean, even telling my mom about it, they live in Florida, and she was like, the dog population in Amarillo is next level. And I was like, it is. And I have no idea why. I know the shelters and the rescues are, you know, ran ragged around here. And I really don't know the answer to it. I feel like it started that there was a lot of stray dogs, and unfortunately they reproduce very fast and you can't get it under control. Yeah. So I don't know the answer to the question by any means, but that is a huge difference.
Have you found that it's a place where it is maybe easier than you thought to start a business, find customers? Like a lot of people talk about the small town aspect of Amarillo, that it's 200,000 people, but like you're going to see somebody you know everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true? And like, does that help as you try to build out your network, where you're getting customers coming your way?
Yeah. So I think in the beginning, I would say no, because I didn't know anyone, but once you start learning people, I ran into my mother-in-law the other day at the grocery store, and the other day, I say that was like a year and a half ago, but, and I was so excited because I finally knew someone, but it is a big town with a small town feeling, because as soon as you do get that, one or two clients that you're really close to, it just snowballs, right? And they know someone who knows someone who knows someone. And I think it was a lot easier to build rapport here, I guess is probably the best way to put it, because people do talk and reviews spread a lot faster, I guess, where in a big city that just really wouldn't happen. There would be so many people that I don't feel like you would have that same snowball effect when it comes to building a business. So I think it was easier than if I would have moved to like Dallas, where I knew absolutely no one. But I mean, building a business in general is tough.
It's hard. It occurred to me, and I've had this conversation a lot of times on the podcast, that there's enough people here that you can find clients, but it's also small enough that you can stand out if you're doing something new or something different.
Correct.
And that's what I wonder if that applies, that you came with a little different approach to dog training. And so people like us who we've done a lot of training sessions with a lot of different places. We never went to our friends and said, oh, you have to use this person. But we did after, Lincoln spent time with you. And so it felt like, oh, this is something different. And that's where the network can really stand out.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Yeah, it is totally different. I'm going to be completely honest with you and say I'm terrible at marketing. I'm awful at it. I like to get people by word of mouth because I feel like once I can talk to someone, it's so much easier than just trying to like send out flyers and do things like that. So it is different. And I feel like as soon as people learn that it's different, it's really easy to kind of explain why it's different and they understand. I mean, if you think about if you're going to teach a kid something, right? How do you teach a kid? If you can, you teach it through play. And dogs are no different when it comes to that. They enjoy playing. They enjoy all of that side of it. And I think it's easy for people to understand that portion of it once they get that portion. Okay. But I think the concept is hard to explain to people because if you are walking, they're like, oh, you train dogs. How do you train differently? And you're like, oh, I play with your dog. They're like, yeah, that's cool. Like, they just don't see how that could be beneficial. But once they hear it from someone that's done it, they're like, oh, that is so unique and different. It helps once you can get your foot in the door. But like I said, I'm terrible about that.
Well,
so
are you surprised that you've ended up here in Amarillo?
I am. Yes and no. Had you asked me 6 years ago if I'd be in Amarillo, Texas, I would tell you no, just because I had no reason to be here. Right. But am I happy to be here? Absolutely. I do really like Amarillo. Like you said, it does have a similar feel to Omaha. It feels like home, I guess you could say, but it's not like so big that you're swallowed by everyone, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have guessed I would be here, but I'm happy I'm here.
This episode of Hey Amarillo is supported by PestTex Pest Control. Ben with PestTex sprays my house every few months. He was just here last week before the spring weather hit and the pests started arriving. I use PestTex because they're locally owned. They use pet-friendly products, and most importantly, they don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Ben will come to my door, he says hi to my dogs, he asks if I've seen anything that he needs to address, like spiders showing up inside the house, and I'll be like, yeah, we need to work on the spider thing. He'll evaluate every customer's pest problem and find the best way to solve it. So to get in touch, call or text 806-433-8841 or look up PestTex on Facebook or Instagram. Okay, I'm back with Shilee Pearson. Shilee, this is part of the show I call 8 Straight. 8 Straight is sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas, and its collection includes dozens of fossilized skeletons of mammals discovered in this region, including a saber-toothed cat. I know you don't do a lot of cat training, but there haven't been that many dog fossils, but there are a lot of giant cat fossils. You can see that and learn more at panhandleplains.org. Do you do cat training?
No, I don't.
Okay, I was going to say, does anybody do cat training? Okay. When you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
We kind of touched on it earlier, but I hope that we have a better handle on the dog population, and just in the sense of maybe somewhere more to put them or to help the rescues, because there's plenty of them around here that are working. But I just hope that we have a better handle on that.
There's like the big institutional parts, which is like Amarillo's welfare management program, which we don't have a lot of control over. Not everybody's going to start a rescue or do anything like that. But like, what can a normal citizen or dog owner do to help with that?
Yeah. And so like the management, right? You can volunteer there if you have extra time. But if that's not up your wheelhouse or it's not something you want to do, if you have a dog, I always tell people the number one reason dogs end up in the shelter is behavioral problems. Okay. And so training your dog can be helpful, right? If your dog is under control, the dogs around you tend to be better and under control too. But not only that, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't want to foster a dog because I work. I work an 8 to 5 or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, that dog would rather be in your home in a kennel, or wandering your home for those 8 hours rather than stuck in a shelter 24/7.
Right.
And I think that would be beneficial too, because getting the dogs out of those kennel environments can really help them get adopted. But at the end of the day, if that's not something anyone can do, just offering help at any level, right? Donations, they need food at the shelters, they need bowls, they need all that stuff, can at least help them keep running and free up their hands and worry so they can work with the dogs and stuff like that, if that's not something we can all do. So,
but there's also an element of being a responsible dog owner by putting in the work to make sure your dog behaves.
Yes.
Because if you don't do that and you end up with a dog that's super reactive for whatever reason, like that dog may end up in the shelter despite your best efforts.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, talking to a lot of dog trainers around here, they're willing to work with dogs that are from the rescue, So if you end up getting a dog from the rescue, reach out to a dog trainer, because most likely they're going to be able to help you. And if budget is an issue, a lot of times dog trainers are willing to work with you on that too.
Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
I would say stray dogs. I know we're just like, hounding that right now. It does have too much wind too.
Was that something that you had to get used to?
The wind?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because
yes.
you'll get a cold front blowing into Omaha or something like that, but it's still a little bit different here.
It is in the buildings around here, right? We don't have a bunch of big buildings. Omaha has tall buildings, and so it would help with the wind. But down here, it's just awful.
It just blows.
There's just too much wind. So, I would say stray dogs. We have too many stray dogs. So,
what does this area not have enough of?
Mom and pop restaurants. Okay. So coming from Omaha, there's a ton of restaurants in Omaha. And there was constantly everyone always heard like, oh, Omaha has more restaurants per capita than New York, which is not true. But it puts it in perspective that there is a ton of restaurants up there.
People say that about Amarillo too.
Do they?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. So, I found, and maybe I just haven't found them, which is true because I'm a homebody. But I feel like in Omaha, you could be like, oh, I want sushi. And there were like 10 to 15 places you could choose for sushi, or you want Italian, and there's so many choices that were mom and pop shops. It weren't, chains.
Olive Garden.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I feel like that's, yeah.
Yeah. I think our problem is that most people experience Amarillo through the I-40 corridor, and that's a whole bunch of chain restaurants.
Yeah.
And very few people will turn off as they're coming through, to get to the smaller places where you are going to have more authentic places.
Yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite local neighborhood?
I love the greenways. I think they're beautiful, but also that walking path in there is just awesome to work with and all of that. I like I said, I'm a homebody, so I don't get around a ton, but I'm in the greenways a lot, and I really do like that.
You take dogs out there for training?
Yep. And I have some clients in the greenways too, but I'm out there for training quite a bit too, just because there's always people walking around and everything like that, and it's beautiful out there too. So
okay. What's your favorite local restaurant?
I would say Fire Slice, the back alley pizza place. Yeah. That place is awesome. We found it probably 6 months ago, and I think we go there 2 or 3 times a week. So, yeah, we love that place. So
it is always one of the best reviewed Amarillo restaurants on TripAdvisor.
Really?
Which just always surprises me because it is hard to find. But yeah, it gets a lot of traffic, I think, from that sort of stuff. So.
Yeah, it's awesome. And Matt is one of the managers there, and he is phenomenal. So we always go there and talk to him. So he's great too.
What's your favorite local nonprofit?
I would probably have to say Scar, which is a rescue around here. I've worked with them probably for the past couple of months, just doing evals and stuff like that. And they're doing some great work. And I think they're one that gets overlooked because they're a little bit smaller, but they're phenomenal.
Okay. What kind of evaluations do you help? Like somebody with your expertise, like what do you come and do to help a nonprofit like that?
Yeah. So they just called and they said, hey, we have a dog and we need to see if it's actual aggression or if it was just, an incident. And it wasn't a big incident by any means, but it was one of those, we just need to see, can this dog be helped? Or is it, do we need to do a different avenue with this dog rather than trying to adopt it out? Do we need to look for certain criteria and all of that? So that was the one that I recently did. So you just went and kind of played with the dog, just to kind of see where everything was at. And the dog ended up being phenomenal. She's great. I think she might still be up for adoption too, but she is phenomenal. And she was just a puppy, mouthy puppy that got a little too excited. And so that's kind of what I do is just go in, look at the problem, see, is it trainable? At the end of the day, you have to figure out, is it trainable or is it genetic? And then you kind of go from there. So that's kind of what I do to help them.
Have you found dogs that are not trainable, like that you can't fix, some sort of problem that it has?
Not with that rescue, but in general, yes.
Okay.
So there is a level that some issues are genetic or the dog is just not totally there. Coda, my dog, was one of those dogs that it was management, right? The problem was never going to go away.
Like it's just something in their
it's just something
breeding or
wired
what
wrong.
They were born with.
Yep. There's just some wiring that's gone wrong. And at that level, it is just management. Those are far and few between. I really do think so. I think most problems can be addressed and fixed if you use that word lightly and not so much management, but it is possible for it to be genetic and it not be fixable.
What's the most underrated aspect of living here?
So being new to the area, I would probably say the canyon.
Okay.
Just because when I moved here, I lived here for like 3 or 4 months and I didn't even know it existed.
Like, was it on your radar?
No, I didn't even know it was here. And my husband was like, oh, there's a canyon. We should go hike with the dogs. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, is it a hill? Like I didn't know anything about it. And he was like, no, like it's huge. And so we went down there and I was like, how did I not hear about this? I don't know. I feel like being new to the area, it was something that was so not talked about, or at least just not advertised. And it's so cool. Like there's nothing cool like that in Nebraska. So I feel like it's really underrated if you haven't grown up here and know it's there.
Right.
People that are coming in have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, it's one of those things. You can be in some circles where people talk about it all the time because they go ride mountain bikes there or they hike or run there. And then other places where it's just sort of taken for granted here in Amarillo. And it's always interesting to hear from somebody outside here who's like, look, there's this thing here and nobody's talking about it. Why are you not talking about this? And
that's so true. Yeah. Cause I mean, now when I talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, we go there all the time. But I feel like it's just not brought up in conversation because it's so normal to everyone around here. And that's not normal. Like there's nothing cool like that. There was a river in Omaha. Like that was about the exciting thing, but.
Okay, when was the last time you visited the Big Texan?
So I've only been to the Big Texan once, and it was like 6 months ago.
Okay, so why did you go?
Why?
Yeah, did you have somebody in town or? My
mom wanted to go there, and we just ended up going. Okay. So yeah, that was it. I mean, nothing.
How did you like it?
It was okay. I am a very plain Jane eater, so anywhere I go, I'm going to get chicken. If you know me at all, that's like all I eat. So I mean, I just got chicken there, so. I mean, chicken's about the same anywhere. So.
Yeah, that's probably true. Okay. I always like to see what people's perspective is because it's not for us, it's for tourists who want a cowboy experience. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay. That concludes the 8 straight questions. I like to close by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
So I'm going to go back to Scar, the rescue, or honestly, just any of the rescues, Gracie's Project, the Canyon Kennels. I think like we talked about earlier, just taking the time to try to get out there and help them in any way that you can. Financially, if you can't do financially, just offering any sort of help can be really beneficial to them. At the end of the day, they're working on a problem they didn't create and they're trying their best to do it, and make a dent in it. And I feel like it's very overlooked the amount of work that they do and the amount of heartache that goes into it too. And I think anything that we can do to help them would be really beneficial. So.
Okay. Shilee Pearson, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes the episode. I want to say thanks to Shilee for the interview. You can learn more about her at RuffLifeK9.com. That's Ruff, R-U-F-F, and the letter K and the number 9, RuffLifeK9.com. Thanks to PestTex Pest Control and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting the podcast, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. Thank you for listening. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Patrick Burns, Josh Wood, Wes Reeves, Jason Burr, Katie Linger, Corey Burns, Barbara and Jim Witten, and Cindy Graham. This has been episode 394. My name is Jason Boyett, and I'll see you next week.